Adrian Sterling's footsteps echoed through the long marble hallway of his estate, a place so pristine and carefully curated that even the laughter of children seemed too loud, too fragile to belong. Yet, that night, the house was not filled with laughter. His chest tightened as he pushed open the heavy oak door of the guest wing, his jaw already taut with the weight of years of grief and unspoken frustrations. And then he froze. On the enormous four-poster bed, his twin sons, Aiden and Asher, were nestled under the blanket. But what caught him off guard was the figure lying between them, Liana Brooks, the young nanny he had hired against his better judgment only 3 months ago. Her arms curled protectively around the boys, their small bodies pressed into her sides like they had finally found shelter after years of running from unseen storms. For a moment, Adrian's heart stumbled, confused. Then it hardened, because what he saw triggered the wrong memories, memories of betrayal, of broken trust, of the one person he had once allowed into his heart who abandoned him without warning. "Out!" he barked, his voice thunderous in the quiet night. Liana stirred, her lashes fluttering as she opened her eyes slowly, confusion giving way to understanding when she met Adrian's blazing stare. She sat up, careful not to wake the boys, her movements gentle, protective. "Mr. Sterling, they had nightmares again. They begged me not to leave them. I set out," he snapped, his tone slicing through her words before she could finish. His voice was louder than intended, enough that Aiden stirred in his sleep and whimpered softly. Liana leaned down instinctively, whispering comfort into the boy's ear until his breathing steadied again. The sight of her soothing his son, of the boy clinging tighter to her, gnawed at Adrian, but his pride would not let him soften. "You're fired," he said firmly, low but final. Liana's lips parted, the protest trembling on her tongue, but she closed her mouth instead. She looked down at the twins, brushing Aiden's hair from his forehead before gently prying her hand free from Asher's tiny grip. She rose without argument, straightened her blouse, and left the room quietly. Adrian stood there, watching her figure disappear into the hallway, the air thick with silence. He should have felt relief. No nanny had ever made it past a month with his sons, and he had told himself countless times that no outsider would ever understand what those boys had endured. But as the door clicked shut, he looked back at the sleeping children, their faces more relaxed than he had seen in months, and the hollow ache of guilt began to spread in his chest. The following morning, the mansion felt heavier. Breakfast was untouched, toys were scattered in untouched corners, and the twins were restless, snapping at each other with a sharpness that reminded Adrian of the very chaos he had hired Liana to tame. His frustration boiled beneath the surface, but it was not the boys' tantrums that haunted him. It was the small folded paper left on the polished dining table. He had not seen it at first. Only when he reached for his coffee did he notice the envelope with his name scrawled in careful handwriting. His fingers trembled slightly as he unfolded the note. "Mr. Sterling, I never intended to overstep. I only wanted the boys to feel safe enough to sleep through the night. They carry so much pain that silence becomes their language, and fear their companion. I know I cannot erase what they've endured, but I tried to give them peace, even for a few hours. If I failed, forgive me. If I succeeded, even briefly, remember it was not me, it was them finally allowing themselves to trust. Please don't let that trust wither. Liana Brooks." Adrian sat down heavily, the words echoing in his head. He had spent years hiring specialists, therapists, tutors, counselors, all with glowing credentials. None had lasted. None had reached the boys. Yet a young woman with no grand pedigree, only a quiet persistence and gentleness, had done the impossible, and he had thrown her out. The guilt became unbearable as the day stretched into evening. Aiden and Asher refused dinner, pushing plates away and muttering that Liana would have let them eat pancakes instead. Adrian, usually stern in mealtimes, felt his throat tighten. He did not scold them. Instead, he excused himself and went to his office, closing the door as if to contain the storm inside him. He sat before the shelves lined with dusty law books and family portraits he no longer looked at. His late wife's smile stared down from a frame on the wall, a smile frozen in time, long gone from the world. He whispered into the emptiness, "What am I doing?" His voice cracked, the weight of his grief mixing with the raw sting of his mistake. For the first time in years, Adrian allowed himself to cry. Not the restrained, solitary tears of a man who pretends to carry everything, but the kind of tears that left him gasping, that reminded him he was still human, still broken. He thought of Liana's calm eyes, the way her voice softened when she spoke to the boys, the patience in her smile when Asher tested boundaries, the quiet determination when Aiden shut down. He thought of the note and realized it wasn't a defense of herself, it was a plea for him to see his sons differently. By the third day, the silence in the mansion was unbearable. The twins barely spoke. The staff moved around cautiously, as if the house itself had grown colder. Adrian couldn't escape the guilt. He drove into the city, a decision made impulsively, chasing a woman who had left quietly without asking for anything. It was the first time in years that he had chosen humility over pride. Finding her wasn't easy. Liana had left no forwarding address with the house staff. But Adrian was not a man without resources. He traced her through the small agency that had placed her, learning she had returned to her modest apartment in a neighborhood far from the polished gates of his world. When he arrived, he stood outside her door longer than he'd admit, rehearsing words that felt foreign in his mouth. When Liana finally opened the door, her surprise was evident. She looked tired but composed, her hands dusted with flour from kneading dough on the kitchen counter behind her. Her brows furrowed slightly as she asked, "Mr. Sterling? What are you doing here?" Adrian cleared his throat, his voice unsteady. "I came to apologize. I was wrong. You did something I couldn't. You gave them peace. And I took that from them because of my own pride." Liana's eyes searched his face, as though measuring the sincerity of his words. "The boys need more than discipline, Mr. Sterling. They need someone willing to sit in the dark with them until they find the courage to reach for the light." Her voice was steady, but there was no anger in it, only truth. He nodded, swallowing hard. "Please, come back. I'll make it right. Whatever conditions you need, I'll accept them. Just don't let them lose the only person they've trusted in years." For the first time since that night, Adrian allowed himself to hope. Liana Brooks did not say yes immediately. She stood at the doorway of her small apartment, arms folded across her chest, apron still tied at the waist. Adrian Sterling looked uncharacteristically out of place there, his tailored suit brushing against the chipped paint of her hallway, his polished shoes planted firmly on linoleum that had seen better decades. The silence stretched long enough for the smell of her half-baked bread to drift between them. Finally, she stepped aside and gestured for him to come in. The modest living room felt different from the grand, cold halls of the Sterling mansion. A second-hand couch with worn cushions, a stack of well-read books piled beside a lamp with a crooked shade, and framed sketches of children's hands pinned to the wall gave the place warmth that money could never purchase. Adrian lowered himself onto the couch, feeling the unfamiliar give of old springs. Liana sat opposite him, watching, waiting. "I wasn't exaggerating," Adrian said at last, his voice quieter than before. "The twins, they've gone silent again. They won't eat, won't laugh. I've seen them angry, but this is different. It feels like I've broken something I don't know how to fix." He rubbed his temples, the polished mask of control cracking in her presence. "They need you, Liana. And if I'm honest, I need your guidance too." Her eyes softened, but her reply was steady. "If I return, it cannot be the way it was before. I won't take orders that disregard the children's emotional needs. They're not soldiers to be disciplined into line, Adrian. They're two little boys carrying trauma bigger than their bodies." He nodded, swallowing the pride that usually resisted such words. "Then tell me what you need. Write the rules yourself if you must. I'll follow them." That was how the new arrangement began. Liana returned to the Sterling mansion, not as a silent employee, but as a voice in shaping the boys' lives. She insisted on small changes first. Mealtimes became less rigid pancakes on a Wednesday, spaghetti eaten with laughter on a Sunday evening, rules replaced with rituals that gave the boys a sense of safety. Bedtime transformed from lonely silences to storytelling, where Adrian found himself awkwardly reading aloud at first, then easing into voices that made Aiden giggle and Asher peek out from under his blanket. The mansion itself began to feel different. The once intimidating rooms opened up under Liana's influence. The grand piano, untouched for years, was coaxed into life as she encouraged Aiden to tap random keys until curiosity turned into music. The garden, usually manicured and silent, became a battlefield of water balloons on summer afternoons. Even Adrian found himself soaked once, caught in the twins' elaborate ambush, and though he grumbled, the sound of his laughter surprised them all. Through it all, Liana guided Adrian in ways that made him reconsider his role as a father. Connection before correction. She reminded him when his voice rose too quickly. Look at what they're feeling before you react to what they're doing. At first, it felt unnatural, as though he were betraying the disciplined order that had ruled his life. But then he saw the change, Aiden beginning to share his drawings, Asher asking questions instead of withdrawing, both boys daring to trust again. One evening, after the twins had fallen asleep to the sound of Liana's soft lullaby, Adrian lingered in the doorway. The dim lamplight bathed her face in warmth as she smoothed the blanket over the boys. Something stirred in his chest, not the sharp pang of grief but a gentler ache, a reminder that life still had room for tenderness. When she turned and found him watching, he quickly shifted his gaze, but the silence between them carried something unspoken. It was Liana who suggested the idea that would change everything. One afternoon, while they sat in the study, Aiden sketching dragons on scrap paper and Asher building towers with blocks, she said quietly, "There are so many children like them, Adrian. Children who've lost trust, who've been bruised by silence. They need spaces where healing isn't about rules, but about being seen. What if we built something together?" At first, he hesitated. His fortune had been built on law, real estate, investments, not on fragile dreams. But as she spoke, her voice steady and eyes alight, he saw more than a dream. He saw a mission. That was how the Sterling Brooks Healing Center began, an idea scribbled on a notepad, growing into late-night discussions, then into architectural sketches spread across Adrian's mahogany desk. They envisioned a place where children could paint their fears into colors, plant gardens that reminded them of growth, and sit with counselors who listened before prescribing solutions. Adrian handled the logistics, contracts, funding, outreach, while Liana poured herself into designing the heart of it. Art rooms, storytelling circles, therapy animals, spaces where children could simply be. The process wasn't smooth. Adrian's business instincts clashed with Liana's insistence on warmth over efficiency. He once argued for streamlined schedules, only for her to shake her head firmly. "Healing isn't efficient, Adrian. It's messy. It takes time. If we treat it like business, we'll fail before we even start." He stared at her then, realizing she was right. And for perhaps the first time, he let someone else's vision guide his own. As the center began taking shape, so did their bond. Working side by side blurred the lines between employer and employee. Nights spent reviewing proposals often ended with shared coffee and quiet laughter about the twins' antics. Adrian found himself drawn not only to her wisdom, but to the resilience in her eyes, the unspoken strength of a woman who had weathered storms of her own, yet chose to build shelters for others. Liana, too, felt the shift, though she guarded herself carefully. She knew the risks of blending personal and professional lives, especially in a world where Adrian's wealth and influence could overshadow her independence. But when he asked her one evening, almost shyly, "Why do you care so much about children who aren't yours?" she simply replied, "Because I was one of them once." The weight of her words lingered. He didn't press further, but in that moment, Adrian understood that Liana's compassion was not a performance. It was a survival instinct turned into purpose. By the time the center opened its doors to its first group of children, the Sterling mansion had transformed into a home again, and Adrian Sterling had transformed into a man willing to learn. He stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony with Liana by his side, the twins clutching her hands proudly, and he felt a sense of hope he hadn't known since before tragedy had reshaped his life. The whispers of admiration from the crowd meant little compared to the sight of children running freely across the courtyard, their laughter breaking open the silence that had once ruled his home. Adrian glanced at Liana, who watched the children with quiet joy, and he thought to himself that perhaps miracles didn't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes, they came in the form of a woman who refused to give up on two broken boys and on him. The Sterling Brooks Healing Center quickly grew into a beacon of hope. Children who had once withdrawn into themselves began to paint, sing, and laugh again within its walls. Parents whispered with gratitude, and volunteers streamed in, eager to be part of something bigger than themselves. But as the center gained recognition, so too did the attention of those who resented its rise. Whispers began to twist into accusations, and soon a smear campaign was set in motion. The first article appeared in a local tabloid, suggesting that funds had been misused, that Liana Brooks had manipulated Adrian Sterling into financing her personal ambitions. Photos were doctored images of Liana holding the twins were framed as though she had ulterior motives, and forged documents circulated online alleging that she had a criminal past. At first, Adrian dismissed it as noise. But when sponsors began pulling out and journalists swarmed the mansion gates, he realized this was no ordinary opposition. Someone wanted the center destroyed. Adrian's instinct was to fight with power and influence, to summon lawyers and crush the opposition with sheer force. But Liana stopped him, her hand firm on his arm. If we fight them the way they expect, Adrian, we'll only look guilty. The truth doesn't need fists, it needs light. We show them who we are, and we let our work speak. Her calm steadiness grounded him. Together, they opened the doors of the center to the public. Reporters were invited to witness therapy sessions, to speak with families whose children had found safety there. Volunteers came forward with testimonies. Parents shared stories, and little by little, the lies began to crumble under the weight of truth. Still, the campaign forced both Adrian and Liana to confront their pasts. When a rival publication unearthed details about Adrian's late wife, painting him as a cold and neglectful husband, guilt pierced him anew. He sat in his office late at night, staring at her portrait, whispering apologies he had never said aloud. Liana found him there, his face weary. She didn't speak at first. She simply sat beside him, her hand resting over his. She would want you to heal too, Liana said softly. Guilt isn't love, Adrian. Love is what you're giving Aiden, Asher, and all these children now. That's how you honor her. Her words were a balm, and slowly he began to let go of the ghosts that had held him prisoner. Liana's own past came knocking in an unexpected form. One evening, as the center hosted an art showcase of the children's work, a woman appeared in the crowd. Lorraine, Liana's estranged mother. Her hair was streaked with gray, her eyes heavy with regret. When their gazes met, time seemed to collapse. Memories of abandonment, hunger, and nights spent wishing for a mother's embrace flooded Liana's mind. Liana, Lorraine whispered when they finally stood face to face. I made mistakes. I was weak, but I want a chance to know you again. The air between them was tense, filled with years of silence. Liana's first instinct was to walk away, to protect herself from reopening old wounds. Yet as she looked at the paintings hung on the walls, children expressing their scars in colors and shapes, she realized that forgiveness was not about forgetting. It was about choosing to stop carrying the weight alone. I can't erase what happened, Liana replied, her voice trembling but resolute. But I can listen. We'll see where it goes. The reconciliation was slow, fragile, but it opened a new chapter for Liana, one where her past no longer defined her but informed her strength. Through all this, Adrian's bond with his sons deepened. He no longer barked orders from a distance. He knelt to their eye level, listened when they spoke, and laughed with them without fear of losing control. Aiden, once withdrawn, began painting portraits of his father, while Asher, once restless, proudly declared he wanted to help other children when he grew up. One evening, as they tucked the twins into bed, Adrian lingered in the doorway, watching Liana smooth the blanket. The boys whispered, "Stay with us." And she did, her hand resting gently on theirs until their breathing evened out. When she rose, Adrian reached for her hand. "Liana," he said, his voice hushed but steady. "You didn't just heal my sons, you healed me. I can't imagine this life without you. I don't want to." He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, his hands uncharacteristically unsteady. "Marry me. Not just for the boys, not for the center, for us." Tears welled in her eyes, not from surprise, but from the weight of the moment. She saw not the billionaire who had once fired her in anger, but the man who had learned to listen, to love, to forgive. Slowly, she nodded. "Yes, Adrian. Yes." The twins cheered the next morning when they heard the news, and their joy echoed through the mansion. Soon, the family story spread not as a scandal but as an inspiration. The Sterling Brooks Healing Center expanded, recognized for its innovative approach, blending structure with compassion, discipline with empathy. One of the brightest stories to emerge from the center was Belle, a troubled teen who arrived with a hardened glare and silence sharper than knives. Liana worked with her patiently, introducing her to Journey, a testament to resilience. "You gave me back my voice," she told Liana once, hugging her fiercely. As the years passed, the mansion no longer felt cold. Its walls echoed with laughter, its rooms filled with warmth. Adrian and Liana stood together not just as partners in love, but as builders of a legacy that turned pain into purpose. Their love was not about perfection, it was about scars, stitched together with patience and trust. And as they stood before a crowd at the grand expansion of the center, with Aiden and Asher beside them and Belle unveiling her newest artwork, Adrian took the microphone and said, "Healing isn't about erasing scars. It's about embracing them and showing the world that they can be beautiful." The applause was thunderous, but it was the quiet squeeze of Liana's hand in his that mattered most. They had faced betrayal, guilt, and fear, but together, they had built something unbreakable. And so their story closed not with an ending, but with a beginning, a promise that love and healing could ripple outward, touching lives far beyond the walls of their home. Moral lesson: love is not the absence of scars, but the courage to live with them, to share them, and to let them teach us compassion. Adrian and Liana showed that forgiveness is not weakness, but strength dressed in humility. Parenting, partnership, and healing all thrive not on control, but on connection. Their journey is a reminder that no one is beyond repair, and no wound is too deep for love to touch. If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, share it with friends, and comment on the lessons you've learned.